All right, welcome to the deep dive, everyone. So, you come here because you want to, get smart quickly,
Yeah.
learn about important stuff. And today, we're going to really zero in on something that I think shapes all of our futures.
Yeah.
It's how we plan, the most effective ways to teach our little ones,
Yeah.
preschool kids.
Right.
Or so with those really early years, right? Nurturing, their cognitive, their emotional growth, all that good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's so foundational, right? These early years. And to do it right, we need really good evidence about what actually works.
That's it, right?
Yeah.
You got to have the data to back it up. And for this, you've brought a really, really fantastic resource to the table.
Yeah.
We're going to do a deep dive into a meta-analysis, which, for folks who might not be super familiar, it's like pooling the data from a ton of kids. Like imagine individual kids from huge studies across Germany.
Yeah.
That's the power we're going to tap into.
Right. We're able to see patterns and insights that you wouldn't be able to find from any one study alone because we're looking at all this combined data. So it gives us a much stronger foundation to understand what works.
Okay, so your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to extract the really key insights. Like what's the gold in here?
Yeah.
This massive data set. But specifically, we're talking about how to design the very best studies. Those, the randomized controlled trials, the gold standard, right?
Yeah.
To see if these interventions are truly working. And think of it like this. It's a shortcut. You're going to get the cheat sheet to what makes research in this field really, really solid.
That's it. Because it's not just about whether an intervention, seemed to work in this one particular instance, but how do we build future studies that are actually going to reliably detect these effects if they exist?
Okay, so one thing that really jumped out to me when I was going through this material was this concept of design parameters. Now, that might sound kind of technical, right? Don't get scared, stick with us. But these are like the building blocks. You have to think about them before you even launch into the research itself.
Yeah, they're critical.
And they really determine whether your study can even pick up on the changes, right?
Exactly.
Like, is it sensitive enough to even register whether this intervention is actually making a difference?
Yeah, and a lot of times researchers don't pay enough attention to these parameters. And what ends up happening is their study doesn't have enough power, statistical power.
Right?
And what that means is it could miss a real effect.
Oh.
So the intervention could be working, but your study is designed in such a way that you can't detect it. Or on the flip side, it can be too big, much more expensive than it needs to be.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. What are some of the really core design parameters that these researchers were looking at?
So two of the ones that really kept on popping up were ICCs, which stands for intra-class correlations, and R-squared.
Okay, ICCs. I'm just going to take a stab at this.
Yeah.
That tells us how much the kids are similar within, let's say, the same classroom.
Yes.
Or the same daycare center compared to kids in other ones, right?
You got it. You absolutely nailed it. So in preschools, kids are naturally grouped together, right?
Yeah.
So the ICC essentially tells us how much the outcomes, things we're interested in, like their literacy skills or their social-emotional development, how much those things tend to be similar for children in the same group compared to the variation we see across different groups or different centers.
So if, the ICC is high, let's say, for, early math skills, it basically means kids in the same classroom tend to perform kind of similarly in math compared to, kids in other classrooms.
Exactly. And this really matters for how we design our studies.
Okay.
So if kids within a group are really similar to each other, each additional child in that group, it gives us less independent new information.
Interesting.
So we need to take that into account, this clustering.
Okay.
We need to factor that into how many kids we actually need to study.
So it's like if you were doing, a survey.
Yeah.
And everybody at one table had already, discussed and agreed on their answers. You need to go to more tables.
Exactly.
To get a truly representative sample.
I love that example. That's a really good one.
Okay, and then there's R squared. So what's that all about?
So what's your understanding of R squared?
My understanding of R squared is that it's how much the variation in those things we're measuring.
Yeah.
The literacy level, the emotional regulation, how much of that can be predicted by what we already know about the kid beforehand.
Yeah.
Their home environment, their developmental level, before we even start doing anything with them.
We got it. So It's about how much of those differences we see in the kids, how much of that can be explained by other stuff that we know.
Oh.
And the things that we know are called covariates.
Okay.
So it could be their age, their socioeconomic background,
Yeah.
whether they have a migration background, and importantly, their baseline scores on measures of what we're interested in studying.
So if we know that a child who comes into preschool, let's say they have a huge vocabulary,
Yeah.
and that tends to like lead to stronger reading skills later on,
Right.
then the vocabulary would be like a covariate
Yeah.
that has a high R squared for reading outcomes, maybe.
Exactly. And so by including these covariates in our study, when we design it and in the statistical analysis, we can control for some of those pre-existing differences.
Okay.
And it reduces the, unexplained variability in our data, the noise.
Yeah.
And so it makes it easier to see the impact of the intervention. It's like you're sharpening the focus on a blurry picture.
Got it. So both ICCs and R squared are basically about like understanding the data, like what's the inherent structure of the data we're playing with?
Yeah.
And how much of the variation can be explained even before we do anything.
Exactly. And it's really important to have good estimates of these parameters to plan a study that's actually going to be able to find a meaningful effect.
Okay, so this meta-analysis you brought, it's looking at a ton of data from these German preschools.
It is, yeah.
What were some of the key takeaways about these parameters?
Yeah, so one big takeaway is that there was a huge range of ICC values.
Okay.
So they looked at both cognitive outcomes and social emotional outcomes.
Yeah.
And for example, the ICCs between different daycare centers, there was a lot of variation, which means there are really systematic differences in average outcome levels across, preschools in Germany.
Got it.
So it really underscores the fact that you have to account for this clustering. You can't just assume, oh, every kid's an independent data point.
Right, because they're all in the same classroom.
Exactly. If we ignore it, our statistical analysis can be totally misleading.
Okay.
And then we could end up with wrong conclusions about the intervention. So, the meta-analysis provides a really helpful set of estimates that researchers can use as a benchmark.
Oh, cool.
So when they're planning their own studies in Germany, this gives them something to start from.
That makes a lot of sense. And then what about R squared? What did they find out about that? How much could be explained by those pre-treatment covariates?
Yeah, so they found that incorporating those pretreatment covariates, particularly like a combination of socio-demographic factors and baseline measures, it really substantially increased how much variance was explained.
Okay.
And this makes the study much more sensitive at detecting the intervention's effects. And they found that even using like proxy baseline measures can be helpful. So, using vocabulary as a proxy for cognitive skills.
Oh, interesting.
Or measures of disruptive behavior as a starting point for social emotional outcomes.
Okay, so even if you don't have a direct measure of, let's say, a child's problem-solving ability at the beginning, you could use something like vocabulary size, which is kind of related, to get a better sense of where they're starting. And that can actually, boost the power of the study.
Yeah. So, for example, let's say your intervention is meant to improve executive functions in kids. And you don't have a direct pretest for that.
Okay.
But you might have something like a measure of their attention span or their working memory capacity.
Okay.
And that could be useful to account for those differences before you even start.
Interesting. Okay, so this is all based on data from Germany. Now, if somebody's listening and they're working, let's say, in the United States or the UK, how much can they actually use these findings?
Yeah.
Can they just take those numbers, those estimates, and apply them to their own studies?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And the researchers who did this meta-analysis, they looked at some of the existing research from the US and the UK, and they found that there were some pretty big differences.
Okay.
So, for instance, the amount of variation between different centers in terms of cognitive outcomes seemed to be smaller in some of the US studies. And that could be because a lot of those studies focused on kids from disadvantaged backgrounds.
I see. So if they have more similar socioeconomic profiles, there's going to be less variation between those preschools.
Exactly. So they actually strongly recommend that researchers don't just take these numbers from Germany and directly use them for studies in other countries.
Okay.
You got to think about the specific context.
Yeah.
The characteristics of the kids in your study. Things like, the structure of the early childhood system, how diverse the kids are, even the specific tests you're using to measure the outcomes.
Right.
All of that can make a difference.
So this German meta-analysis, it's like a blueprint, but you got to adapt it.
You got to adapt
to your own situation.
Yeah.
You can't just take it as gospel.
Right.
You have to kind of look for those estimates that are actually specific to, your country, your kids.
Yeah. And what's great is that these researchers made all of their supplementary material available
Oh, fantastic.
on the Open Science Framework. And it has all these interactive tables with the different outcomes, the different assessment methods.
Okay.
And it even has the R code that they use to do their analysis.
Fantastic. So researchers in other countries, they can actually use that code and adapt it
They can. Yeah,
to make it relevant to their own research.
absolutely.
Okay, so this is super helpful. It's not just about the specific numbers from Germany. It's about giving researchers the tools to do their own careful planning.
Exactly. So no matter where they are, they can design really informative studies.
Okay, now what happens if researchers just completely ignore this? Like they don't pay attention to these design parameters,
Yeah.
or they use the wrong estimates. What's the downside?
There's a couple of downsides. So if you underestimate the ICC, how similar the kids within the groups are, or if you overestimate the R squared, how much those covariates are going to explain, your study might end up being underpowered. And what that means is it won't have a high enough chance of detecting a real effect. So even if your intervention's working, you might miss it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that's a big problem. That means a potentially really helpful intervention could get dismissed
Yeah.
just because the study wasn't designed properly.
Wow.
On the other hand, if you overestimate the ICC or underestimate the R squared, then you might end up with a study that needs way more kids
Okay.
than it actually needs. So it's going to be more expensive and time consuming.
So you're wasting resources.
You're wasting resources.
Got it. So you really got to nail those estimates to make sure your research is both like statistically sound and that you're using your budget wisely.
Exactly. It's about asking the right questions in the right way
Yeah,
and making sure you have the right number of kids to get good answers.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so wow, this has been incredibly insightful. Just to kind of wrap everything up, what are the key takeaways for our listeners when they're thinking about, planning or even reading research on these early childhood interventions?
Yeah, so the big takeaway is that design parameters like the ICCs and R squared, they're absolutely critical. You have to think about them when you're designing any study that's trying to evaluate these interventions
Okay,
because they directly affect whether you can detect a real effect.
got it. And, we talked about using those pretreatment covariates like the background stuff and the baseline levels. That's really a smart way to make your study more sensitive.
Yeah.
And you can even use those proxy measures if you don't have the exact thing you want to look at the beginning.
That's right. So you're using that information you already have, and that can help you actually find the real effect of the intervention.
Right.
But you got to be careful about using the wrong estimates, right?
Right.
Because you could end up with a study that doesn't give you good information.
And anyone who's specifically doing research with preschools, especially in Germany, this meta-analysis gives them some really great starting points.
Yeah, all those numbers for different outcomes, different assessment methods. And what they found about the variation between different centers, that just shows you that, you got to think about where these kids are.
Yeah.
That really matters.
Okay, and then the big caveat, those German findings are super helpful, but they're not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
You got to remember that things could be different in other countries, other groups of kids.
Yeah.
So be careful about applying them directly. Ideally, find some estimates that are actually, from studies in your context.
Yeah. And if you want to really go deep, check out those online supplementary materials on the Open Science Framework.
Yeah, go check that out.
It's a treasure trove of information.
And I love that they're making all that code available, too.
It's great.
So researchers can really learn from their work.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been such a great deep dive into this topic, which is so complex, but so important. And I think the biggest thing for me is that, when we're talking about supporting these little ones, we have to do the work. We have to plan carefully.
Absolutely.
We have to think about these parameters that sometimes, people might not even be aware of. But if we want to get the best evidence to help those kids thrive, we got to do it right.
Exactly. Our research needs to be as good as the interventions we want to use.
Absolutely. Okay, so for you, our listener,
Yeah.
Think about the challenges of designing these interventions. Think about all the work that goes into evaluating them, all the details.
Yeah.
What do you see as the biggest challenges, the biggest opportunities in early childhood education.
Yeah.
Think about it in your own world. What's your sphere of interest? Where do you think, we need to focus our attention?
Yeah.
Where are the bright spots? Give that some thought. It's worth reflecting on.
It is.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
I learned a lot. Hope you did too.
Me too.
We'll see you next time.
See ya.